What if we woke to a morning where the ground beneath us no longer moved? Not a tremor, not a quake, but the hush of absolute stillness. The earth, which has been turning faithfully since the beginning of time, suddenly quiet, its hidden rhythm gone. We would not notice it at first with our eyes, for the trees still sway in the wind, rivers still carry their waters to the sea, and clouds still drift overhead. But deep within, something unspoken would feel different, as if the secret breath of the planet had been withheld. Earth has always been in motion, spinning, tilting, circling, wearing grooves into the heavens. From the first moment dust gathered into stone, rotation carved the path of days and nights. Every sunrise we have ever known is owed not to fire or to light, but to this turning, this endless slow dance that never tires. Without it, the concept of day dissolves. Without it, so does night. And here, we face a question so simple, yet so immense it unsettles. What would it mean for life if the world ceased to turn? It would not be stillness we imagine as peace, but instead, stillness of a heavier kind, an unfamiliar weight pressing onto our shoulders. Not motion paused, but memory itself faltering, because motion and time are bound together, and the end of one might be the end of the other. If Earth halted, the oceans would not politely settle. They would continue their momentum, as if the seas carried memory, as if water itself refused to forget. Waves would rise into mountains and charge across the continents, carrying soil, forests, and stones older than every story we have ever told. Entire coastlines would become echoes of themselves, washed away not by millennia, but by hours. And as sediments drift downward, they would build the first fossils of this new age, drowned forests, cities entombed beneath layers of displaced earth. Air itself carries inertia too. Invisible though it feels, every column of atmosphere is also spinning with us, tens of thousands of kilometers wide, anchored to our rhythm, like fabric clinging to a wheel. Should the wheel stop, the fabric would tear away in violence. Skies would drag across mountains, winds that no mythology has ever imagined rushing over silent towns. We never think of the air as momentum, but it is, every breath pulled into our lungs being part of Earth's secret pacing. What would we breathe when that pace deserted us? And yet, there is another kind of stillness hidden in this daydream. A stillness not of catastrophe, but of possibility. If the spin that governs every hour were erased, might we encounter time differently? We measure life as a sequence of dawns and dusks, months and seasons. We define ourselves by predictable repetition. But if that cycle broke, would something within us awaken, no longer tied to the certainty of the clock? Could memory expand beyond minutes, held instead in long visions of heat and shadow? The rocks would still record these changes. Erosion would carve its signatures into stone, breath by slow breath. Isotopes preserved in ice layers would reveal how quickly oceans reassembled themselves after their wandering. Fossils would document the brief window in which familiar creatures, ourselves included, struggled to adapt to the light that would not leave, or the cold that would not end. Over and over in geology, we see evidence of lives interrupted, yet never truly lost. Life has always written its resilience into the strata. If Earth stopped spinning, would geology remember the silence as well? A planet frozen on its axis would look toward the sun with one half of its face forever scorched, and the other condemned to midnight. But transition would not be instant. For a time, dusk would stall across deserts, across empty seas. A twilight zone between fire and frost might linger, a place where sound barely carries, where water glitters with pale reflection. Perhaps it is there, in the hush of a permanent evening, that life would gather again, new organisms evolving under conditions both unfamiliar and eternal. Stillness tempts us into thinking of endings. But what if it is not an end? What if stopping is only another form of motion, hidden from us until we can no longer lean on cycles we trust? Perhaps Earth has stopped before, in ways we have not yet imagined, and perhaps the fragments we misinterpret in stone, in dust, in shifting isotopes, are memories of that forgotten stillness. If so, then our imagination now is not invention, but remembrance. The idea that our planet could stop turning unsettles us because it reminds us of fragility, that nothing is permanent, not even sunrise. And yet, what else might be possible if so much could be taken away? Could memory itself one day settle like drifting sediment, leaving behind only imprints of who we once thought we were? And so, as we imagine this sudden stilling of the world, the beginning of silence, we are led gently into another question. If oceans and winds, if forests and skies can all be lost in a single halt, then what about us? If this much can be erased, what else might we too have already forgotten? If this much can be erased, what else might we too have already forgotten? Perhaps the answer lies not first in the silence of skies, but in the restlessness of water. The oceans, vast and patient, do not yield so easily to the illusion of stillness. They are reservoirs of memory, of weight, of momentum. Even if the surface of the earth were to pause, the seas would not. They would continue their journey, carrying the echo of a world that had always spun. Imagine standing on a quiet shore. At first, nothing appears unusual. The same salt tang drifts across the air. The same gulls tilt their wings against the breeze. Yet already the water is shifting, not in gentle rhythm, but in accumulating force. Oceans hold kinetic memory the way trees hold rings or stone holds fossils. Their masses, unchained from rotation's secret harness, keep moving eastward, and what begins as a ripple grows into a surge, then rises into horizons of liquid mountains taller than any city we have built. The thought unsettles not out of fear, but out of humility. For all our walls, all our maps, all our names carved into coastlines, we are reminded that the sea has never belonged to us. The sea is a recorder of time. It carries the sediments of vanished rivers, chemical whispers of extinct volcanoes, the breath of ice ages ground into fine grains. Even now, ocean floors bear scars from past upheavals, traces of subduction where continents were swallowed whole, signatures hidden in isotope trails of salt and oxygen. A stopped Earth would only add another archive to this watery memory. The sudden drowning of lands, the collapse of histories too new to withstand such weight, the burial of our moment beneath layers that will one day fossilize us. Perhaps, deep beneath the waves, new trenches would crack open as tectonic stress redistributes. Old mountain ranges might bow under sudden imbalance, their roots sinking into the mantle like forgotten stories, settling back into silence. Fossils of creatures not yet dusted into memory would be tossed into dark abysses, shuffled like pages in a broken chronicle, and countless years from now, if geologists of another kind should arise, would they read the silt the way we read stone tablets today? Would they infer a great stillness, a rupture of balance, a moment when oceans wrote the first sudden lines of an altered Earth? In the calm voice of science, we can calculate these surges, kilometers high in theory, traveling at speeds no harbor could withstand, salt water folding whole continents in sheets of kinetic memory. But there is also a quieter, more speculative voice that asks, what does it mean when water refuses to forget? If oceans roll forward into stillness with such hunger, if they drown the very cradle of our civilizations, then perhaps motion itself cannot be erased. Perhaps the tide remembers for us what we no longer carry. And what else lives within oceans? But life itself, the plankton whose skeletons rain into deep mud, the whales whose songs cross basins like hymns of the planet, the coral reefs that build limestone cathedrals molecule by molecule. If currents shift, if sunlight halts over half the surface while the other half remains in shadow, what forms of life might linger in the margins? Could there be new organisms adapted not to tides that rise and fall, but to tides that never change? A perpetual dusk zone, neither day nor night, held by the memory of motion long after Earth has ceased to turn. We see already, in old sediments, how oceans record extinction. Every layer of chalk once brimmed with shells of ancient creatures. Every layer of dark shale tells of oceans suffocated by their own stagnation. These geologic marks are not just records. They are echoes, rippling forward into our awareness long after their world was gone. In a stopped Earth, future layers may tell of us, of the brief century where humanity drew its maps and believed they were permanent. The oceans, impartial, would overwrite them, as they always have, not because we mattered too little, but because water answers to no witness but time. Standing here, in this imagined future, we realize that oceans are not only physical, they are metaphors of memory itself. They surge even when the ground beneath them halts. They preserve even when surface stories collapse. And perhaps in that way, they are truer to Earth than we are, because they never surrender the rhythm of motion. And yet, if oceans could carry memory past stillness, if they could preserve movement where all else falls silent, then what about the sky? If water can surge forward in defiance of pause, might the air itself too, thin, unseen as it is, hold inertia of its own? Might the air itself too, thin, unseen as it is, hold inertia of its own? We imagine air as weightless, as nothing, yet it is oceans stacked upon oceans above us, an invisible sea heavier than we can ever truly sense. Layer upon layer it presses, from the moist clouds that gather just above our heads to the thin shell stretched against the void. If Earth stopped, this atmosphere would not pause in kindness. It would continue forward, its momentum unchecked, racing above still ground in a long scream of forgotten motion. And what would that scream feel like? Perhaps we picture hurricanes, cyclones, storms larger than any in recorded history. But these winds would not be swirling systems. They would be straight, uncompromising rivers of air rushing over mountains and plains, as if the very sky were being peeled away. Trees that once bent gracefully under breezes would snap like brittle reeds. Valleys, for a moment sanctuaries, would become conduits for violent gales. And all across the equator, air would shear the skin of continents in waves invisible, yet louder than thunder. But past disaster, we must listen for something subtler. For science tells us the atmosphere is not uniform. Its density thick here, thin there, heated by sunlight, chilled by shadow. As the Earth's surface halts beneath it, would the sky not tear into gradients? Layers colliding against each other, stratosphere with troposphere, currents unraveling into unpredictable knots. Could there emerge sudden voids, vacuums between collisions, momentary silences that sound less like wind and more like absence? Nothingness as weather, silence as a storm. Geologists might later see it written in the rocks. Dunes reformed by winds that carved too swiftly, topsoil stripped away to bedrock in weeks instead of centuries, layers of dust out of place, carrying pollen from one continent and dropping it as fossils on another, microscopic isotopes embedded in stalactites, telling of centuries of winds compressed into hours. Even in stillness we would leave behind howling records. But speculation urges us to look differently. What of perception? What of memory? Humans breathe this air, carry it inside themselves. Each breath is the continuation of Earth's turning, a rhythm unnoticed. If the atmosphere tore away, if it no longer kept pace with us, would breathing itself feel different, heavier, sharper, a reminder that we were once synchronized with something greater than ourselves? Could we even live if the air resisted, if each inhalation felt like pulling against the tide of a forgotten motion? In such winds, birds would vanish first, their delicate balance against currents undone. Insects, too, would scatter, stripped from skies before they could migrate or feed. That silence would not just be of emptiness but of absence, a loss of song we would hear immediately. And yet, perhaps some would adapt, perhaps small creatures would tuck themselves into caves, weigh themselves low to the ground, or migrate into zones between fury where remnants of calm remain. Even in habit torn, life finds seams to endure. There is something haunting about the idea that the sky itself carries memory. We look up and see clouds forming and dissolving, but rarely do we consider their persistence. Moisture evaporated may one day fall as snow in another epoch. Carbon breathed out may one day be read by geochemists in ice cores, 1,000,000 years hence. And isotopes carried on upper winds may travel further than any ship we have sailed, whispering stories from one hemisphere to another. If Earth's spin one day fell into silence, the atmosphere might surge and then quiet, but the molecules themselves, the isotopes and gases, would still remember the path they traveled. Imagine twilight landscapes afterward. The surface forever stilled, the worst winds spent. Dust would hang longer in a stagnant sky, sunsets burning crimson past the edges of sight. Without rotation, convection changes, weather no longer pulls storms in spirals. Perhaps then, the sky would settle into eerie stillness, like glass bowed across the horizon. A new kind of habit would emerge. Harsh, yet steady, could human eyes ever look upon it, without feeling the absence of the day we once knew? And what of philosophy? If the sky can be torn from the world beneath it, does it teach us something about identity itself? We too are creatures in motion, rhythms unspoken, our heartbeat, our pulse, our circadian sleep that aligns with Earth's rotation. If the world's dance halted, and our atmosphere raged in refusal, would we realize that identity itself is always borrowed motion? If air abandons us, perhaps so too might our sense of who we are. And still, a whisper of a question lingers. If the skies keep moving when Earth halts, if torn air can remember the rhythm of a vanished spin, then what else remembers? Does the land beneath us, silent stone and iron, also bear secret echoes of the dance, waiting for the day when it stops? Does the land beneath us, silent stone and iron, also bear secret echoes of the dance, waiting for the day when it stops? If oceans rush forward and skies fracture into torrents, then what of the continents, those ancient slabs of Earth's crust that drifted through eons of storm and fire? What happens when they too are suddenly laid bare beneath silence? Already the continents float like rafts upon molten currents, pulled this way and that across the mantle. They wander slowly, yet endlessly, marking eras with colliding mountains, with widening oceans, with rift valleys that split apart like forgotten seams. But if Earth no longer spins, the balance of seas and skies would tip, drawing waters from their equatorial homes toward the poles. Vast basins of ocean would empty, revealing landscapes unseen for tens of millions of years. Plains drowned since the age of dinosaurs would rise again into daylight, or rather into the half-light of a sun now held fixed above the horizon. What secrets lie in those drowned continents? Beneath Caribbean waters lie plateaus of volcanic stone flooded long ago. Under the Indian Ocean rests the memory of microcontinents buried in silence. Perhaps in this sudden stillness we would see their bones once more. Not as explorers but as accidental witnesses to geology unmasking itself. Fossil forests, corals entombed alive, sedimentary layers built grain by grain in forgotten epochs, all revealed, all too late. And yet, exposure is not only revelation. With oceans pouring away, the freed riverbeds and continental shelves would not remain quiet long. Winds, freshly steeped in their furious inertia, would scour these new landscapes, sculpting them before any memory could form. Valleys carved by rust and abrasion in weeks instead of centuries, fossils stripped away from their stony cradles before the world could even notice their reappearance. It would be as though geology, impatient with our gaze, reminded us that revelation is always temporary, that exposure is only another form of erasure. But still, we may linger in imagination. We might walk over plains that once were seabed, dust crunching underfoot where trilobites once swam, where ammonites drifted in spirals, where whole epochs drowned in layered silence. Could such exposure trigger questions about civilizations of old, the possibility of cultures erased not just by time, but by rising seas? Could the lost stories of human ancestors, or long-speculated peoples beneath the waves suddenly lie within reach, only to be snatched away again by entropy's hand? For Earth always keeps its memory buried, never given freely. We know this by the way tectonics swallows ocean floors into subduction zones, erasing entire landscapes into the mantle, by the way deserts sandblast the carvings of civilizations, eroding empires into dust. Even ice, with its isotopic trails, melts and resets the chronicle, replacing old knowledge with blank water. If continents were suddenly laid bare, perhaps it would not be a gift to us. Perhaps it would be a mirror, showing us how much vanishes before it can ever be understood. And what of silence? Continents revealed would also lose their winds first, their seas, their voices. Imagine a vast basin uncovered, stretching flat toward the pole, no vegetation, no birds, only dry fossils crumbling in twilight. The silence there would be deeper than absence. It would be the silence of an unremembered world, a silence heavy with the weight of all that had lived, and all that had gone. So the question lingers, what would we feel if confronted with continents we were never meant to see? Would wonder outweigh sorrow? Would discovery outweigh the certainty that in mere days or millennia, these expanses would be carved away, hidden again by rising waters, shifting climates or burying dunes? And so the continents, like the oceans and skies before them, insist on their own truth. Stillness is not permanence. Exposure is not clarity. What is revealed will soon be lost, just as every coastline we know today was once drawn differently, and will be drawn differently again. Perhaps it is not exposure that defines our Earth, but erasure. Perhaps silence itself is the most ancient law of geology, the slow, endless return of all things back into dust. And yet, if continents can be reshaped and erased, if whole basins and plains rise into view only to fall again, then what becomes of the force beneath them? What of the restless plates, of tectonic seams grinding not at the mercy of rotation, but of deeper fire? If silence rules the surface, what story still burns in the mantle below? What story still burns in the mantle below? Always, it is the story of weight, of pull, of gravity finding its way through stone and flesh alike. For even if continents are stripped bare and oceans surge away, what binds us most deeply does not stop with rotation. Gravity, relentless and unseen, would only tighten its hold when the world fell still. At the equator, where Earth's spin gently let us rise against its pull by the faint gift of centrifugal force, we are lighter than we know. Not by much, barely a fraction of our own weight, but enough that water piles there into a swollen ring, enough that atmosphere wreathes itself thickest round the middle of the planet. The Earth's turning shares its burden with us. Always, without it, the burden would be full again. Each stone would feel heavier, each step would land harder, each heartbeat would work against a little more gravity than before. We think of gravity as permanence, unchanging. Yet here is the quiet truth. It varies already with latitude, with altitude, with what lies beneath. A mountain rich in dense mantle rocks bends the scale imperceptibly, a deep trench makes things weigh less. Without rotation, this patchwork grows sharper, unforgiving. At the equator, humanity would awaken not only to oceans in retreat, not only to skies unbound, but to a sudden heaviness lodged in the bones themselves. A heaviness no diet, no discipline, no prayer could undo. What, then, is the meaning of this weight? Could it be we are reminded of Earth's intimacy with us? That our very bodies are participants in her balance? That we rise more easily because she spins beneath our feet? Or is it warning, a reminder that the privilege of lightness is fleeting, a gift invisible until it is gone? Physics puts it simply, centrifugal relief vanishes, 9.8 meters per second squared becomes closer to 10. Yet lived experience is never so sterile. Imagine rivers flowing slower, under greater pressure of their own mass. Sediments settling with a finality that before was often delayed. Imagine deserts where each grain of sand grips harder, refusing the dance of wind as before. Imagine glaciers groaning with a deeper strain, their ice pressed more ruthlessly against the valleys they carve. Entire landscapes would wear gravity's unevenness like scars, reshaped by weight redistributed. And we ourselves, wandering in this still world, would not only feel gravity in our muscles but in our minds. Heavier sleep, heavier thought, perhaps even a heavier silence. For gravity is not sound, but it crowds memory. If motion once softened the edges of our weight, the lack of motion may amplify our sense of finitude, of being pressed into soil that will one day reclaim us fully. In the poetry of physics we might say without spin, entropy leans heavier, decay becomes a little swifter, a little more complete. And yet, not all is erasure. Heaviness itself might create preservation. Fossils, pressed harder into new sediments, might leave sharper imprints. Volcanic layers pinned tighter to the surface might calcify more stubbornly against time. Even in gravity's grip, memory will not entirely vanish. It only shifts, only changes its shape. Perhaps a heavier world preserves as much as it erases. But unevenness, it must be considered. For once waters depart the equator, gravity reinscribes a different sort of planet, one where poles are deepened with oceans, while the waste dries into exposed land. The Earth that has always worn the roundness of spin would sag back into truer sphere. Our maps, our familiar globe, would warp quietly into new proportions. Could we still call it home, if the very shape of the planet betrayed our memory of it? Paradise, but heavier, silence, but thicker, a body of rock more spherical, but somehow lonelier in that perfection. Standing at the equator in this thought experiment, we would feel it not only in bones but in dust. The dust itself would fall straighter, quicker, collecting in thicker layers. Listen carefully in imagination. You could almost hear it, a faint acceleration, the sound of weight resettling, a thicker silence, like a blanket laid over every motion. Perhaps here, entropy truly earns its title as sculptor, for increased uniformity leads not to vitality, but to erosion's brute persistence. And still, one cannot look at the world's weight without asking, what of the weight within? For beneath crust and mantle burns the molten core, its iron rivers moving with slow certainty, generating the magnetic field that shields us. Would heavier pressure on the outer layers change how this deep engine churns? Would gravity's firmer hand intensify the heart, or would it smother some of its restless motion? If rotation falters, but the core remains aflame, then Earth is not truly still. It is merely heavier on the outside, while inside movement continues. A paradox, surface silence, inner flux. So, gravity becomes both a reminder and a riddle. We may carry it in every step, yet we seldom notice it until it presses harder. We imagine stillness as lightness, but in truth, to stop moving is to grow heavier, more finite, more bound. And yet, if gravity grows unevenly, if we feel its hand differently at equator and pole, perhaps it is only a prelude, for when the spin falters, when the axis ceases to divide night and day, then does not time itself grow uneven too? If this weight can fall differently across continents, could time fall differently as well, lingering in one place, fleeing in another? Could time fall differently as well, lingering in one place, fleeing in another? Perhaps that is the most haunting gift of a halted Earth, the redefinition of time, not as a moving cycle but as a place fixed in light or abandoned in shadow. If rotation ends, so does the rhythm we have always trusted, dawn and dusk, day and night, the turning of stars overhead that has guided every ancestor and every prayer. Without spin, half the globe remains locked in sunlight, half entombed in darkness, each side condemned to its eternity. What would it mean to live where the sun never shifts in the sky, to wake beneath its eternal gaze, no shadow longer than yesterday, no evening close at hand? At first, perhaps, there is relief. Time to work, time to wander, time with no sunset, pressing us toward conclusion. But soon the luxury becomes burden for light without end. Seers, plants, once delicate, begin to wither, soils dry under an unyielding orb, oceans shrink where heat lingers, salt crusting across their beds in pale scars. The stories of day, once written in short hours, unravel into blazing stretches so long they cease to be stories at all, just blinding patterns repeating, stripped of meaning. On the frozen half, another eternity takes hold. Stars sharpen in skies unbroken by dawn, constellations hanging motionless above like carvings on glass. The cold deepens beyond imagination, as warmth drains away into silence. Rivers stiffen into glaciers. Forests stand like black skeletons beneath endless frost. Night is no longer a canvas for rest, but a land of exile, absence without promise of return. In a halted earth, polar dark is no longer seasonal, it is permanent, a sentence without appeal. Between these domains, between fire and ice, there would grow a thin margin, a twilight belt. Here, perhaps, life has its chance. Sun fixed forever low, angled just enough to cast horizon light, never rising into scorching overhead blaze, never falling into unreachable dark. One can imagine forests twisted into permanent silhouettes, plants growing sideways toward a sun that never sets nor rises. Here the earth might still whisper of rhythm, a softer halfway song between burning and freezing, and perhaps, just perhaps, creatures would adapt, learning to thrive not by cycles of sleep and waking, but by constancy itself. Science, too, speaks of this fragile zone. Climate models suggest that where heat and cold collide, vast storms may stretch endlessly, hurricanes without rotation to disperse them, walls of cloud circling the twilight line, thunder echoing for centuries without pause. Could there be rainforests hidden within those storms, watered endlessly by the clash of warm ocean air and frozen winds? Could there be deserts hidden also, blasted clean by gales eternal in their path? The twilight belt becomes not a calm refuge, but a paradox, life made possible by violence, gentleness carried within rage. And what of us? If humanity faced such stillness, would we seek the twilight as a refuge, building cities hardened against endless storms? Would we dig deep into rock to preserve warmth beneath the frozen half, or shield ourselves underground from the permanence of the sun's glare? Already, our ancestors carried seeds across unfamiliar lands, survived ice ages, endured droughts wide as continents. Perhaps we would endure again. But endurance here would not be measured in centuries, but in hours stretched into infinities. Could we truly adapt when even the division of day and night, so fundamental to consciousness, is erased? Philosophy wonders if memory itself would falter. In daylight without night, would human beings grow restless, unable to find pause? Without darkness, how would the body know where to place its sleep, its healing, its dreams? Perhaps sleep would melt away, replaced with restless waking, or perhaps sleep would stretch endlessly, lulled by unchanging horizon. Either way, without divided hours, memory may grow unanchored. The mind could begin to forget its sequence, years folding in on themselves like waves without rhythm, thought without boundary. And in the dark half, perception would warp too. We imagine survivors lighting fires, waiting for a dawn that never comes. But what happens when generations pass in permanent night? When stars are the only companions? Would their culture revere silence as holy, their myths woven from frozen constellations unmoving above them? Would they see themselves as custodians of a sacred darkness, keepers of absence? Even questions of identity might grow divided. Humans of the night against humans of the day, species split by stillness, memory sculpted differently by light or shadow. Geology reminds us that even without spin, Earth is never unmoving. Tectonic forces, mantle plumes, earthquakes, they churn beneath, sculpting surface despite the sky's silence. Volcanoes in the dark half would glow red across eternal ice, oases of heat, attracting life like secret hearths in endless winter. Volcanoes in the light half would paint skies thick with ash, dimming horizons where sun might otherwise be relentless. Even in division, Earth finds ways to balance. Perhaps life itself too would recalibrate, learning new rhythms in a world split starkly in two. But to us, accustomed to day following night, night following day, the greater haunting is not physical adaptation, it is the loss of story. For story is rhythm, beginning, middle, end. Song is rhythm, phrase and silence, note and rest. Life itself feels meaningful because it turns, because it returns, because it rises and falls like the planet beneath it. To live in permanent day, or permanent night, is to lose that pulse. It is to live within a story with no chapters, a song with no pauses, and slowly, meaning itself may dissolve. And yet, does not the twilight belt suggest otherwise? That even in stark extremes, a margin emerges where balance is possible. Perhaps the endless day is not entirely cruel, nor the frozen night entirely silent, but each holds within it the possibility of what comes next. And if extremes can hold memory within their tension, then perhaps time itself could still breathe here. Perhaps stillness is not only stillness, it is also transition, paused halfway between forgetting and remembering. And if in this half-lit place life may continue, if in these extremes the earth still finds its voice, then we are invited to wonder, what of the restless inner force we touched in the last chapter? What of the tectonic hunger beneath, which knows nothing of day or night, only the endless turning heat of the mantle? If surface stories dissolve in light or shadow, might the underworld write a different story altogether, one not erased by stillness, but born of fire? Might the underworld write a different story altogether, one not erased by stillness, but born of fire? For beneath the silence of halted skies and the frozen gaze of the sun, the mantle continues to churn. Earth's crust, that thin fragile rind on which we walk, rests upon a deeper world of movement, molten stone flowing, convecting, rising, sinking. Rotation may falter, but this inner current pays no heed to surface silence. It remembers an older rhythm, one shaped by heat that has burned since Earth's birth. These rivers of stone are not like rivers we know. They move in centuries, in spans longer than empires, carrying continents as though they were rafts lost in a slowly turning sea. To us they seem still, until one day they rupture, a volcano unfurling, a mountain rising. And in such motion, even if Earth were frozen at the surface, the deep layers would keep writing their own chapters. Plates would grind along fault lines, subduction zones would swallow the ocean floor, volcanoes would ignite against eternal day, or carve warmth into eternal night. We often forget that stone, too, flows. Beneath pressure, beneath heat, rock becomes ductile, almost liquid, reshaping itself like flesh regenerating beneath a wound. The continents are not merely vast rafts. They are organisms in slow time, their spines mountain ranges, their scars rifts, their skin worn but ever renewed. And in this halting earth, where the clock of day and night ceases, perhaps we would look downward and realize, cycles have never depended on sky at all. They have always burned beneath us, quiet and eternal, like blood coursing unseen beneath skin. There is something haunting in comparing these flows. Rivers of stone below, rivers of flesh above, streams of magma, reshuffling continents. Streams of blood carrying memory through fragile veins. One moves with a patience so vast we can barely imagine it. The other fragile ceases at death. Yet both speak of continuity beyond the surface illusion of stillness. Both remind us that what seems frozen at one scale is in truth alive at another. Scientists might say that without spin, Earth's tectonic balance could shift subtly. Freed of equatorial bulge, perhaps subduction zones would strain anew, trenches deepening, mountains lifting differently. Heat may rise in altered ways, corridors within the mantle redirecting, but description alone misses the quiet mystery that the very body of Earth, like our own bodies, adapts, recalibrates, persists. Whether or not the sun moves across the sky, volcanoes will still breathe, mountains will still crumble into sediment, the crust will still recycle into fire. Perhaps it is not the end we imagine, but only another cadence, slower, deeper, immune to surface silence. And yet, as rivers of stone continue their quiet cycles, what of rivers of flesh, us, and all life, moving in blood, in sap, in breath? Would our inner rhythms find a mirror in the mantle's persistence, or would they collapse without sky clock and tide? There is a strange tenderness here, to imagine our pulses somehow aligned to convection currents, as though all along we were imitating not the heavens but the underworld. Maybe our blood was always a reflection of lava. Maybe our hearts have always borrowed their beat from stone. If so, perhaps the end of day and night does not empty us, but roots us more deeply in the earth's true rhythm, the rhythm of fire, decay, renewal. Imagine civilizations learning to measure time, not by rising suns, but by volcanic pulses, by earthquakes, by the layers of lava that cool into stone. Imagine days marked not by shadows lengthening, but by mountains breathing smoke into still skies. Could such a measure of time be more honest, more intimate, an existence lived to the planet's heartbeat rather than to sky's illusion? And still, erosion waits. Rivers of stone may rise, but rivers of water, of ice, of wind, will always drag them down. In the halting world, where weight presses heavier and entropy's brush works quickly, mountains may erode faster into plains. Perhaps nothing endures long on the surface, except what is carried inward, into mantle, into memory. Just as flesh wears itself away until only minerals remain, so too will civilizations wash into graves geologic, their traces dragged downward into heat, recycled as though they never were. What, then, is the lesson whispered here? That stillness above does not erase story, only shifts it deeper. That beneath the silence, rivers of stone continue to write. And perhaps we, rivers of flesh, can only endure by recognizing ourselves in them, not separate, but kin. For like them, we flow until we vanish. Like them, we carry memory in fragile channels. Like them, our fate is to return, always, to the core from which we came. And yet, if the earth beneath us flows regardless, if stone continues its slow journey through time even when sky stands still, then what of the shield those fiery rivers produce? What of the great invisible guardian, the magnetic field that wraps us in protection against the universe? If mantle and core continue moving, does that mean our magnetic shell will endure, or will stillness of surface someday echo inward, silencing this hidden song too? Does that mean our magnetic shell will endure, or will stillness of surface someday echo inward, silencing this hidden song too? For deep within the planet, below mantle and crust, lies iron in constant motion, a molten sea that generates Earth's magnetic field. It is this unseen force that shapes compass needles, that bends auroras into green fire, that shields us from solar wind and cosmic storms. Without it, our skies would be stripped of air, our oceans scoured into vapor, life itself left exposed. In the stillness of a halted Earth, would this inner circulation continue to sing, or would the lack of rotation slowly quiet its rhythm, until compasses drift, until auroras fade, until silence spreads not only across land and sea, but across the sky itself? Geophysics tells us the dynamo of Earth's core depends on heat, on convection, on flow. Rotation lends it order, shaping spirals out of molten currents the way stirring sculpts eddies into soup. But even without rotation at the surface, the heat does not vanish. The core keeps burning, a furnace born of planetary birth, fueled still by radioactive decay, by the slow freezing of inner iron releasing latent heat. Motion would endure, though its pattern might shift into chaos. Magnetic fields might grow irregular, weakening in places, strengthening in others, no longer a perfect cloak, but a tattered veil against radiation. Imagine that veil faltering. Solar winds, now less deflected, press harder against the upper atmosphere, peeling layers of air away molecule by molecule. This is no overnight catastrophe, but an erosion stretched across centuries, across millennia. Lighter atoms, hydrogen, helium, slip into space. Water follows, broken into its elements by relentless sunlight, its hydrogen lost forever. The seas, already scarred by inertia, and shifted by gravity's uneven grip, now begin to thin, not by flood, but by evaporation into the void. Earth, no longer armored by her magnetic field, becomes vulnerable to cosmic weather written across the intervals of stars. And yet, perhaps magnetism too holds memory. Perhaps the field would stutter, flip, break apart and reassemble in strange configurations, like fractured music finding new harmonies. We see such records already in basalt, where iron crystals lock into direction at their moment of cooling, preserving maps of magnetic reversals stretching back hundreds of millions of years. A still Earth, with its disrupted field, would also write its chronicles into stone, lava flows, whose magnetic orientation tells of a planet struggling to hold onto its compass. Millennia later, these frozen whispers might reveal a truth we once lived through but did not endure to tell. But for those who lived in that silence, what would it mean to lose the compass? Imagine sailors drifting with nothing to steer them, their needles no longer pointing home. Imagine birds whose wings carried them by instinct across continents, now lost among currents, their migrations failing, skies emptied of their songs. Navigation has always been built on memory of rhythm, stars rising, compasses aligning, tides pulling shores. If the field fell apart, it would be more than physics unraveling. It would be trust itself dissolving, the loss of orientation so deeply woven into life's fabric that even instinct falters. Perhaps humanity would turn once more to stars, but in a stopped earth, stars themselves are fixed above, unchanging in their place. No rising, no setting, no rotation to carry them across the heavens. Directions, too, would stand still in perfect silence, offering no guidance. North, south, east, west. Concepts built on motion would blur into irrelevance. We would stand at the center of a compass that has ceased to turn, a metaphor, not of navigation but of disorientation complete. And yet, even here, wonder persists. What if losing the magnetosphere gave us gifts as well as grief? Auroras no longer confined to poles might flame across twilight skies, immense curtains of charged color painting continents. Sunstorms, violent though they may be, could create luminous spectacles, constellations burning brighter under bombardment. Entire cultures might grow around the endless aurora, treating the loss of shield not as catastrophe but as revelation, a sky alive in ways it had never been before. Is it possible life could adapt? Could creatures evolve skins woven thicker with radiation-resistant biochemistry? Could we too find ways not only to shield ourselves beneath rock and water, but to learn to live in a world where solar storms are as ordinary as rain? Perhaps the compass breaks, but a new kind of map emerges, one not of direction but of endurance. There is a deeper question hiding in these speculations. If magnetism falters when rotation ceases, are we forced to remember that nothing is eternal, that even planets, even shields of iron, are temporary stories? Or does the persistence of molten motion beneath remind us that memory has layers, some erased at the surface, some still murmuring in the deep? For every time the magnetic field has reversed, every era it has collapsed or fragmented, life has found a way to continue. The record of stone tells us this. Fossils carry no interruption then, no absolute cut in continuity. Weak fields may batter life, may expose it to storms, but resilience carves its place even in radiation. Might it again? Could stillness, instead of extinguishing the song of Earth's magnetism, simply change its key? Perhaps compasses fail because we were never meant to rely solely upon them. Perhaps direction is not fixed in iron, but learned in silence, north written in memory, not in a needle. And if so, then losing the spin of Earth and the magnetism it conjures would not be the end of orientation, but the opening of another way of knowing where we are. And yet, if the magnetic shield weakens, if auroras dance beyond measure, if storms reach the ground unchecked, then what of the moon? What of the companion orbiting us, tugging tides through gravity as Earth no longer spins? Would not its pull, too, begin to drift beyond habit, the seas answering differently to its call in this new stillness? Then what of the moon? What of the companion orbiting us, tugging tides through gravity as Earth no longer spins? For as long as there has been ocean, the moon has stirred it. As long as there has been night, the moon has lit it. Its rhythm is as ancient as breath itself, its gravity shaping life from its very beginnings, guiding the first tides that left salt creatures stranded long enough to stumble into lungs and limbs. The moon has been not just a companion, but an accomplice in our becoming. But all this depends upon Earth's spin, upon the delicate duet of rotation and orbit. Tides are born not merely of pull but of imbalance, of Earth rushing beneath the lunar tug. If rotation halts, then this duet falters. Oceans no longer chase the moon's gravity with delay, no longer build bulges that slip behind. Instead, water stretches more obediently, a giant unseen teardrop pointing toward and away from the moon. The familiar rhythm, the twice-daily rising and falling that has marked the heartbeat of coasts, would dissolve into a slower, stranger pulse. Perhaps tides would lengthen to weeks, even months. Perhaps they would vanish altogether. And what of us, who have always measured memory against the pull of the tides? Civilizations rose along deltas, where rivers met moon-drawn seas. Fishermen honored the calendar of high tide and low. Our words, our myths, our calendars, even romance itself is written in lunar cycles. To lose that is to lose more than water's rhythm. It is to lose one of time's oldest guardians, a keeper of memory no less important than the spin of Earth itself. Yet the moon is restless. Even now, it drifts away from Earth. At the pace of centimeters each year. We know this through laser reflections sent to its surface, echoes traveling back across void, over millions of years. This small escape becomes immense. With Earth still spinning, this drift slows rotation in return, a gentle trade of energy across gravity's invisible rope. But if Earth ceases rotation, the bargain ends. There would be no spin to drag against, no rotation to yield. The moon's orbit, unanchored from this ancient dance, may wander, slowly at first, then unpredictably. Imagine the moon not where we expect it, but displaced, rising no longer at appointed hours, hanging longer in twilight, or drifting into arcs misaligned from memory. And if the balance wavered too far, if gravitational feedback failed, then one possibility grows darker, that the moon might leave entirely. It has done so before, elsewhere, for many smaller companions are thought to have departed from planets during the early chaos of formation. Should our moon begin to slip away, we would lose more than tides. We would lose the axis of myth, the mirror of identity. Nights would be emptied of their lantern, reduced to stars without anchor. Humanity, adrift in both compass and story, would find itself lonelier than it has ever been. Yet there is also speculation. Soft and strange, almost tender. What if in stillness the moon's drift leads not to escape but to greater intimacy, without rotational drag, without further exchange? Maybe Earth holds the moon closer. Perhaps it falls gradually inward, slow arcs across centuries tightening until one night, immense and luminous, it looms larger than it ever has before. Imagine standing on a ridge of frozen desert, watching the moon fill half the horizon, its craters visible with uncanny clarity. Perhaps then the moon would command not only oceans but heartbeat itself, exerting gravitational stresses felt in stone and flesh, in tectonic plates and vessels of blood. Could we bear such intimacy, or would we fracture beneath it? Scientists might predict that approaching too much, the moon would cross the Roche limit, pulled apart by Earth's gravity into rings, a broken memory, encircling us as Saturn's ornaments encircle it. Humanity, if still present, would look upward, and see not one companion, but a circlet of shattered stone, a halo of our lost moon, its fragments reflecting sunlight, scattering silver arcs across eternal day or eternal night. A loss, yes, but also a reminder that nothing, not even the moon, is immune to entropy. Everything drifts, everything forgets. And yet, memory resists. For should the moon depart or disintegrate, its fossil signature endures. Ancient corals show us tides recorded in their growth, counting days and years like tree rings. Sediment lines whisper of tidal ranges, shifting through eons. In fossils, in rocks, in isotopes, the moon's impact on Earth is preserved, etched as rhythm within rhythm. The moon may drift from sky, but it will not drift from history. Its pull has been engraved into Earth's crust, into her beings, into her very way of breathing. Perhaps this is the truth hidden in speculation. The moon may leave, but memory cannot follow it all the way into void. On Earth, there will always remain testimony. Layers of chalk from plankton that lived in lunar tides, shells that thickened against repeating waves, poetry written in ancient languages about its glow on still water. It is us who forget, never the planet. And when we imagine a halted spin, when we ponder moons lost or moons too close, what we are asking is not whether the moon remembers, but whether we will. And so we drift in thought, tides untethered, directions dissolved, the moon itself slipping from habit. It is a sobering vision. A sky stripped of its single bright sentinel, a horizon unmoored, yet this thought is only beginning. For if the moon itself might vanish from memory, then what of our own creations? What of our technofossils, our artifacts, our cities? Will they remain when the Earth grows still, or will they too be erased, as forgotten as tides undone? Will they remain when the Earth grows still, or will they too be erased, as forgotten as tides undone? Humanity has etched itself into the crust with a fervor unlike any other creature. Cities spanning deltas, roads cutting across valleys, quarries carved deep into the planet's bones. Yet even as we build, as we inscribe our names into monuments and foundations, time presses its soft weight against us, whispering that most will vanish. In a halted Earth, where oceans shift and skies drag themselves eastward, our works would falter more quickly still. Imagine the skyline of a great city, the towers of glass and steel, shimmering in an endless midday sun, or shadowed forever under an unfaltering night. Heat expands the metals until they squeal in their joints, cold cracks their foundations, storms, amplified by atmosphere torn from habit, batter their facades into fractured mosaics. Within years, windows fall to shards, facades collapse into streets, and ivy or dust claims what we once believed eternal. The still earth would hold no reverence for our angles, no kindness for our balance. Yet some fragments endure, buried far beneath soil, where oxygen cannot reach. Concrete stiffens into artificial stone. Our plastics flow slowly into sediments, their polymers destined to fossilize into technofossils, artifacts of chemistry that know natural fire nor ocean, yet knows how to unweave. Stainless steel buried in oxygen-poor submarine trenches might last millennia. Even after our cities collapse into rubble, echoes of us may persist in these strange materials, plastics, alloys, rare isotopes we pulled from deep veins and scattered unnaturally across the surface. The Earth has seen echoes before. Fossils are nothing if not echoes, impressions pressed into rock by pressures uncaring of story. Trilobites etched their silhouettes into seafloor silt. Giant ferns preserved their patterns in coal seams. We too will leave imprints. Layers of concrete strata, the faint metallic sheen of aluminum particles carried by wind across every continent. The radioactive shadows of isotopes spawned in our reactors. These are our coral reefs, our chalk layers. This is how Earth will remember us. Not in monuments standing proud, but in residues buried deep. But the haunting question remains, will Earth recall humanity as clearly as it recalls ammonites or forests? Fossilization is not kind, and memory in geology is partial at best. Millions of species have come and gone without leaving a visible trace. Millions of civilizations, if such there were before us, may already lie buried in eroded rock, their echoes dissolved into entropy's silence. Could we be the same? Could our memory, our techno-fossils, someday compress into ambiguity, indistinguishable from minerals of unknown origin? Perhaps the future's geologists, if any shall exist, will hold our plastics or alloys as curiosities, strangers to their sedimentic language, never sure we were truly there. Even the notion of stone is restless. Basalt swallows basalt. Granite weathers into sand, marble crushes into dust. Entropy does not discriminate between natural and human-made. It reduces all into particles fit for oceans and wind. In this still world we imagine, where gravity presses tighter and air tears across landscapes, our materials would be tested even faster. What survives will not be what we expected. A sculpture's beauty may crumble, while a shard of melted plastic persists. A poem on paper may vanish, while the trace of our carbon lingered in altered isotopes of ice, an invisible artifact telling more than any word. And still, beneath silence, there is tenderness. For to imagine our memory fading is also to imagine ourselves folded back into the earth that bore us. Echoes in stone are less about permanence than about belonging. Perhaps what remains of us will be indistinct because it was always meant to merge with the deeper chorus. Driftwood layered in shale, bones mingled with chalk, plastics mistaken for amber of a new epoch. In stillness we do not entirely disappear, we are translated. So, the question that rests is not whether the earth will remember us, but how it will remember, as towers on the horizon. No, as whispers in strata, as dust in ice, as isotopes humming faintly long after the reactors are extinct. To be remembered is not the same as being visible. The world does not promise clarity, it only promises to carry forward residue, sediment, trace. And yet, if even we, with all our stone and steel, may dissolve into little more than geologic ambiguity, then what of entropy itself? If silence devours monuments, if rivers grind mountains, if oceans erase civilizations, might entropy be the truest sculptor of all, the hand that takes every echo and remakes it into something new? Might entropy be the truest sculptor of all, the hand that takes every echo and remakes it into something new? For even before the earth might stop spinning, even before oceans flood or skies unravel, entropy has always been at work. It is the quiet artisan, carving mountains into dust, bleaching bones into mineral shadow, scattering heat and symmetry into silence. While we cling to cycles, to seasons, to the illusion of permanence, entropy whispers of endings woven into every beginning. Geology offers its testimony. Volcanoes erupt in grandeur, but their cones erode into plains. Mountain chains rise in glory, only to be smoothed away in landscapes gentled by rivers. Fossils, perfect in detail for a time, crumble into fragments until creatures vanish from stone's memory. Even atoms degrade, uranium ticking steadily into lead, one isotope at a time. Entropy is patient. It has never rushed. There is no need, for time itself is its accomplice, and in that patience, it sculpts with unmatched persistence. We imagine sculptors as hands chiseling marble, shaping form from block, but entropy is not a sculptor of figures. It works inversely, removing figure, loosening structure, returning all distinctions to dust. The grand palace and the small pebble meet the same end. This is not cruelty, though we often feel it so. It is continuity. Entropy's art is not to destroy but to distribute, to spread what was once concentrated, to turn the rare and precise into the common and diffuse. In this way, it is the planet's equalizer, the quiet balancing of everything back into stillness. Perhaps that is why silence feels heavier than motion. In silence we hear entropy's voice most clearly, the rivers carrying silt to sea, the glaciers grinding rock, the wind peeling away facades. Nothing resists forever. And yet, there is beauty in this slow undoing. Imagine the ruins of a city, ivy threading through fractured walls, moss softening marble columns. What seems like loss is also a kind of tender absorption, the world reclaiming us with patience. Not destruction, but embrace. Still, the idea unsettles, for civilization is raised not to endure entropy, but to defy it. Our clocks measure against it, our archives resist it, our monuments reach for permanence, even as rain prepares to dissolve their names. In a halted earth, where cycles of day and night vanish, where time itself feels less like motion and more like immobility, entropy's hand may feel even stronger, for when rhythm stops, breakdown accelerates. With no more rising and setting sun, there are no markers of renewal, only the weight of ongoing decay. Consider ice. On the endless night side, ice hardens mountains into frozen fortresses, but even fortresses crumble, not swiftly, not dramatically, but with microfractures and chemical shifts. Hydrothermal vents, volcanism beneath, heat enough to allow melting even in shadow, will still soften their grip. Thus, even eternal night is not eternal. It is simply slower at surrendering. On the endless day side, entropy plays another trick. Heat bakes landscape into barren salt, sears life from soil, drives matter into gas molecules that wander into sky. Slowly, atoms themselves escape gravity's hold, surrendering Earth's substance to space. Silent, invisible erasure. Even life obeys entropy. The body itself is a series of ordered improbabilities. Cells aligned, proteins folded, memories filed by neural sparks. Yet each moment entropy tugs against them. Cells age and miscode, memory falters, bones grow brittle. Without cycles of rest and renewal, in a halted earth with no distinction of night and day, would entropy hasten its sculpting? Would the absence of rhythm accelerate frailty? Perhaps age itself would feel different, less like a gradual journey, more like a sudden collapse into silence. But philosophy offers another perspective. Entropy may not only be the sculptor of ends, it may also be the midwife of beginnings. For though it dismantles forms, it opens space for new arrangements. Extinctions make room for species yet to emerge. Collapsed mountains release minerals that nourish oceans. Stones dissolve into clays that plants require. Every loss is transfiguration. The echo is remade not into absence, but into another kind of presence. Could it be, then, that entropy is less an enemy than a teacher? Not because it erases, but because it assures flow. If nothing endured forever, then everything has its chance to be. Entropy is not the conclusion of story, but the assurance that story keeps changing hand, passing from trilobites to reptiles to mammals, to us, and beyond. When Earth stops spinning, we may imagine entropy accelerating, sculpting faster, but in truth, it would only continue its law, reshaping what we leave behind into forms unimaginable to us now. And perhaps the most haunting thought of all, if entropy is the true sculptor, does memory itself belong to it as well? Our thoughts, our histories, our arrangements of order too, language tied to synapses, stories tied to ink, images tied to stone, all of these eventually diffuse, memories evaporate, languages decay, even dreams dissolve unspoken. In a halted world, perhaps the ultimate silence is not in the sky or the sea, but within us. The steady molding of memory into forgetfulness, entropy working within consciousness, sculpting us from within. Still, in this sorrow there is a strange comfort, for if entropy reshapes us, then we are not lost. We are given back, transformed into dust, into sediment, into elemental signature in isotope and stone. Our stories remain, though their shapes alter. And if one day, in future aeons, something looks back upon this halted earth, it will find those traces not intact, but reformed into another verse of the planet's endless song. And yet, if entropy is the sculptor, if silence is its chisel, what then becomes of time itself? Can there be sculpting without a clock to hold it? What shape does forgetting take when the sun no longer rises, and night no longer falls? What shape does forgetting take when the sun no longer rises, and night no longer falls? For all of human history, we have measured ourselves against cycles, the arc of daylight giving way to shadow, the sigh of seasons folded into years. We read these rhythms as the script of time itself, tying memory to their familiar pulses. But what then, when the cycle halts, when the hands of the clock are stilled, their pendulum swung to one side, no longer returning? Without spin, there would be no rotation to guide us toward morning, or to nudge us into rest. Days and nights, as we name them, would fracture into permanence, dissolving the very concept of hours. Time would lose its face. The clock, still perhaps ticking in our interiors, would no longer align with the larger stage of the world. For the first time, memory would be orphaned, unanchored from the rising and setting sun. It would float into confusion. Already, science has whispered clues of this dependence. Our circadian rhythms hold at roughly 24 hours, coded deep into cells, aligned through retinas to the sweep of daylight. In caves where light never reaches, that rhythm drifts, elongates, falters, subjects lose track. Days stretch, nights blur, sequences fracture. Now imagine this not as experiment, but as condition, a world where no shadow lengthens, no dawn softens, no clock is reinforced by sky. Would memory itself shatter into long monotonies? Would sleep become impossible, or stretch longer than waking, a slow surrender into timelessness? Perhaps the strangest thought is that time would not stop, only its measure. Radioactive decay proceeds still, isotopes ticking imperceptibly inside stone and ice. Glaciers, if any remain, still gather inches of snow and compress them into stratified stories. Atoms vibrate, heat diffuses, entropy expands, the deeper clocks remain. It is only perception, only story, that falters. The external language of day and night erases, leaving us to wonder if we ever truly knew time, or if all along, we only knew its shadow. Would we then search for new anchors? Tectonic pulses, volcanic cycles, the breathing glow of aurora, perhaps in the silence of halted spin, these slower phenomena would become our new hours, our new calendars. But such scales dwarf the human span. To count time in earthquakes or the rise of mountains is to feel ourselves even more diminished, to lay our histories against a backdrop that refuses to notice. Maybe we would stop trying. Maybe we would abandon measure altogether, surrendering to the truth. Time does not belong to clocks. Time belongs to silence. And what of civilizations without clocks? Would they dissolve into timelessness as stories without chapters do? Memory has always required sequence. First this, then that, then after. Without sequence, we risk losing narrative, our deepest way of knowing. Imagine a culture unable to say yesterday or tomorrow, because no sky validates those directions, no season confirms the passing. Their history would be memory unmoored, intimate and momentary, perhaps luminous in feeling but fragile in continuity. Could such a people still recognize themselves across generations, or would identity itself flicker without reference to the turning of Earth? In stone, however, time never pauses. Fossils remain the clockwork of memory. One stratum overlays another, compressing sequence whether we count it or not. Perhaps the Earth itself continues to mark time for us, carving out epochs in sediment, in isotope shifts, in unconcealed aurora. We, lost in timelessness above, might forget whole centuries, yet the planet's pages will remain, waiting to be read by beings who may never even know our names. It raises the possibility that time itself does not require consciousness. It unfolds with or without us, sculpting archives indifferent to whether they are opened. And there is humility in this realization. We imagine that without sunrise, time must end. Yet Earth reminds us that its true clocks, decay constants, erosion, convection, keep balance beyond our senses. Our clocks merely translate. Their hands do not command time. They echo it, fragile representations of rhythms we did not invent. When Earth stops spinning, and our translation falters, perhaps we are simply returned to silence, to a world where time flows still, but flows secretly, unspoken. And yet, a subtle grief remains. To live without clocks is not to live without flow, but to live without story. If the sun no longer sets, then there are no evenings of memory to gather around, no cycle of renewal to promise rest, no dawn to suggest beginning. Imagination itself may grow brittle in such stillness. What is a tale without chapters? What is a song without pause? Maybe that is where we find a deeper truth, that forgetting is not a failure of memory, but its natural shape when rhythm is absent. Clocks unspun, histories unwind, and what we call forgetting may only be a different way of remembering, one less linear, more diffused, more like sediment blending with dust. Not discrete events, but an atmosphere of impressions, a memory without hands. And yet, if the clock has no hands, if memory blurs into atmosphere, then what traces remain for those who come after? Can a moment arrest itself so completely that it fossilizes? Could an instant of stillness, preserved by geology, outlive even the stories we fail to tell? Could an instant of stillness, preserved by geology, outlive even the stories we fail to tell? Fossils have always been this kind of paradox. A moment arrested, an echo hardened, a life reduced to silence, yet stretched across eternity. To hold a shell in your hand, pressed into stone for hundreds of millions of years, is to realize you are touching not its body but its pores. The second it was buried in sand, the instant sediment refused to forget. The earth stops nothing lightly, yet rarities occur where time itself seems caught mid-breath. Volcanic ash falls upon forests, sealing leaves, insects, and even footprints so suddenly that the entire world of one instant endures unbroken. Ripple marks from ancient seas, frozen as sand hardened into stone, still carry the curves of a current that dissolved 500 million years ago. These are not just records, they are fossils of moments, halted in their becoming. So we ask, if the earth stopped spinning, might whole epochs of paused memory be written into its crust? Imagine cities swept by oceans and embedded quickly in silt, preserved not in fragments but in startling completeness. Buildings rising into newly lithified seabeds, vehicles and statues encased like ammonites in limestone. Imagine fields of grass pressed into stone, forever bending eastward under winds of inertia. Imagine one instant, the moment skies tore free, storms carried silt, continents realigned, captured as if Earth itself wished to hold its breath at the very moment of forgetting. Scientists know the mechanics: rapid burial, a lack of oxygen, minerals seeping inward molecule by molecule, until organic form becomes stone. Yet beyond chemistry lies mystery. For fossils do not merely preserve, they interrupt. They are places where time bends, allowing us to touch not only lives long vanished, but their specific instant. The curl of a trilobite's tail as if hiding, the spread of wings as if just about to lift, gestures eternal. What is a fossil but an unfinished sentence, made permanent? If Earth were to still, it might create fossils of our age with an intensity beyond imagination. Skyscrapers locked under inundated plains, libraries sealed in volcanic ash, skeletons preserved in the sediment of frozen seas, entire myths, entire epochs, reduced to texture in rock. Perhaps one day these would be found, not by us, but by an inheritor species, or by time itself, should it have new eyes. And upon discovering us, would they call us a civilization, or only notice our outlines, our clutter of technofossils, our strange plastics seamed into strata? Yet there is another question. Do all fossils need stone? Is memory fossilized too, in atmosphere, in shifting isotopes, in the ratios of gases? Already our exhalations alter the air, our combustion changes the chemistry of ice. Each breath in its way is a trace, a fossil of a temporary moment attributed to us. A halted Earth would lock these even more swiftly. Gases frozen into cold half of the planet, atmospheric shadows etched into ice like records of a still breath. The fossil of a moment may not be seen only in stone, it may linger as air crystallized, light refracted, silence itself thickened. And still, philosophy stirs here. If fossils are interruptions, if time itself occasionally agrees to pause, does that suggest eternity is not smooth but layered, that existence is not a river only, but a mosaic of moments, arrested and carried forward? If so, then perhaps we too are fossils already. Each memory within us, preserved in the sediments of our bodies, in the isotopes within our bones. Though we change outwardly, each instant of our becoming is etched within us, never entirely lost. The haunting truth, though, is how selective fossils are. Most lives are erased. Most moments disappear without trace. Fossils are rare not because Earth is cruel, but because memory is costly. The world cannot carry every moment intact. Perhaps that is why, When they endure, they feel holy, rare victories of permanence in a universe otherwise dissolving. We hold them gently, not just because they are ancient, but because they are exceptions to forgetting itself. And yet, if moments can fossilize, then what of forgotten civilizations? Could an old people, erased and buried deep, linger still in strata undiscovered? We marvel at trilobites and ammonites. But what of the bones of cultures we never knew existed? Could entire stories, entire languages, be hidden fossils not yet revealed? If the Earth could fossilize an instant of our collapse, how many collapses has it already hidden? So perhaps the fossil of a moment is not only a relic of the past, it is also a promise of mystery yet to be uncovered. Moments are not gone, they lie quietly, waiting in stone, waiting in ice, waiting in dust. And yet, if these moments endure, if memory hides itself not in words but in stone, what happens when civilizations themselves are sifted into silence? Could it be whole peoples, entire histories, lie already fossilized, erased from memory, hidden beneath strata we have not yet touched? Could it be whole peoples, entire histories, lie already fossilized, erased from memory, hidden beneath strata we have not yet touched? We are taught that civilizations are fragile, their reach measured by stone that endures or script that survives. Yet, between each layer of fossils and minerals, there lies an absence too vast to ignore. The Earth, with its constant churning of mantle and erosion, has swallowed entire epochs of life into silence. Why should cultures, if they rose before us, be any more immune? The anatomy of a forgotten civilization is not like that of a city weathered by time. It is more skeletal, more uncertain, pieced together only by voids and anomalies, a scattering of isotopes in sediments, where no natural cause explains them, a seam of unusual minerals shaped not by volcanic fire but perhaps by metallurgy, plastic polymers embedded deep in rock older than humanity could credibly account for. These questions whisper not of certainty but of possibility, the faint suggestion that perhaps we are not the only ones to have marked the Earth with the ambition of permanence. But permanence is deceitful. Consider how little the record has preserved even of ourselves. Our oldest true structures, temples hewn in stone, are only thousands of years old. Most of our artifacts, made of wood, cloth, leather, would vanish within centuries. Beyond a few technofossils, plastics, nuclear isotopes, artificial alloys, how long will our presence be legible? 10,000 years? 100,000? The blink of an eye in geological terms. Now stretch backward, millions of years. Entire windows exist, in which a civilization, even one vast, even one brilliant, could have lived, thrived, collapsed and been erased, leaving only scattered traces we have not learned to read. The ocean hides most of what the Earth has known. Subduction drags seafloor down into mantle, recycling crust every 200 million years. If a city lay on such a floor, its ruins would already be molten silence. Even on land, glaciers grind landscapes into bare stone, dunes migrate endlessly across deserts. Rivers erase their own deltas with each shift in course. It is not conspiracy that we find no evidence of deep civilizations. It is inevitability. Memory on this planet is fragile, and the Earth is better at forgetting than at remembering. And yet, there are anomalies, the stray notes in nature's song that make us pause. Metals purified in ways unusual for natural processes, found in strata older than our known technologies. Curious alignments in ancient stones that hint at intention. Fossil fuels themselves, oil and coal, sometimes imagined as strange archives of lost forests, lost atmospheres, even entire planetary experiments folded into geology. Though mainstream science settles these mysteries within natural frameworks, the human mind cannot help but wonder, what if? What if those dark seams carry not only ferns pressed into rock, but echoes of a civilization erased so fully that only its carbon shadow remains? Speculation, when handled gently, is not hubris but humility. To wonder about forgotten civilizations is to recognize how slight our own time may be. We are recent here, an interlude of only thousands of years atop billions. We cannot yet say how often the planet has rolled its dice, how many times intelligence might have sparked and been extinguished, how many histories have been compressed until indistinguishable from stone. What if becomes not arrogance but respect. Respect for the enormity of deep time, for the certainty that most stories of Earth will never be told. And then comes philosophy, leaning in to ask, does it matter whether they existed, if all record of them is gone? Identity, memory, civilization, these too erode. perhaps to be forgotten, is not failure, but the natural course of being. Just as fossils preserve only a fraction of life, perhaps civilizations fossilize only as shadows, their essence not remembered in detail, but translated into the conditions that allow the next to rise. If so, then every forgotten culture, whether imagined or real, is still present within us, their memory dissolved into soil, their wisdom diffused into landscapes we inhabit without knowing. For what survives of us will not be monuments but atmosphere, carbon dioxide rising in our ear as a geologic note that will echo millions of years hence. Changed isotope ratios in sediments will testify to our hand long after our names vanish. Our story will not be remembered in words but in chemistry. If others came before, their story too is whispered in invisible ways, layers of odd gases, minerals dislocated, ecosystems warped by hand unseen. The anatomy of a forgotten civilization may not be ruins. It may be absence itself, changed background conditions we cannot trace back to a hand. Then comes the question of meaning. If civilizations are erased, if all complex stories eventually unspool back into silence, what is the purpose of striving? Here entropy teaches softly, meaning is not permanence, but presence. We do not endure forever, but we contribute our sediment, our layer, to the whole. Civilizations, like species, like mountain ranges, live for their season, then dissolve. Perhaps to be forgotten is simply to have finished one's part. And yet, one cannot resist the temptation to look again, from the ridge of silence into the abyss of what if. What if beneath some desert dune lie the petrified beams of a city we do not remember? What if a fissure in basalt seals more than geology, but archives of lives unimagined? What if we too are only the latest in a series of civilizations dreaming of permanence while drift and mantle prepare to fold us into memory? So the anatomy of forgotten civilizations is anatomy of absence, scattered data, reinterpreted possibilities, silence overwhelming evidence. But perhaps this silence is the point. Perhaps the earth never wished to remember every detail. Perhaps its memory is softer, subtler, carried not in ruins but in soils, oceans, isotopes. Memory smoothed until it becomes indistinguishable from nature itself. And yet, if so many could have been forgotten, whole peoples erased into background, then what of dust, dust that moves across oceans, dust that lingers even when memory and monument fade? Could dust itself be the oracle of persistence, carrying whispers of forgotten worlds where all else collapses? Could dust itself be the oracle of persistence, carrying whispers of forgotten worlds where all else collapses? For when stones crumble, when civilizations sink, when even fossils erode back into grains, dust remains. It is the smallest fragment, yet the most enduring traveler. Grains lighter than memory itself, lifted by winds crossing oceans, climbing into the stratosphere. What towers cannot carry across centuries, dust bears as burdenless cargo, drifting in silence from one age to another. We find dust everywhere. In deserts it rolls like a tide across dunes, spilling across continents, unimpeded by borders. The Sahara dispatches its dust westward each year, delivering fertility to the Amazon basin, feeding jungles and ocean away. Volcanic eruptions cast their ash into layers of atmosphere, where particles circle the globe, dimming suns, cooling climates, reminding us that air too has memory. Even cosmic dust falls daily upon our rooftops, tiny fragments of space folded into the fabric of Earth, subtle relics of stars long gone. Dust, it seems, bridges not only distances but epochs. In a still Earth, without rotation, dust would settle differently. Winds no longer driven by Coriolis would carry with unfamiliar insistence, depositing layers in places that had never known such silting. Some basins would be buried within decades, luffs plains thickening into vast blankets of fine sediment that future geologists would one day drill into and read like an oracle's scroll. Each layer of dust tells a story of where it was born: iron-rich grains from deserts, volcanic shards from ash, fossilized pollen adrift like ghosts of vanished forests. Dust archives what is otherwise forgotten, scattering memory randomly but faithfully across improbable distances. But dust speaks not only of landscape, it speaks of civilization. The air over our cities is thick with it. Soot from combustion, metals worn from tires, microscopic shards of plastic lifted invisibly into the wind. These rise into the atmosphere, carried across oceans, wandering into polar ice, embedding themselves far from the places they originated. Centuries from now, millennia even, ice cores may still whisper our story through these tiny motes, not because they were intended to endure, but because they could not help but. Dust is accidental memory, uncurated, a testimony no historian can erase. Perhaps that is why dust feels so intimate. It is the most democratic of records, grains from palaces and tombs, from villages and battlefields, all scattered alike into atmosphere. Dust smears together events we would keep separate, leveling their importance. The marble chipped from a king's statue drifts with the pollen from unnoticed flowers, indistinguishable once they settle together. Dust remembers without judgment, without hierarchy. It does not tell stories of power or submission. It tells only of presence, the fact that something was, nothing more. There is a strange poetry in this. For while we try to build monuments against entropy, dust bypasses our need for grandeur. It assures that, however small, however dispersed, there will be record. It is an humility we did not ask for, but perhaps need the knowledge that our permanence may rest not in stone steeples, but in microscopic grains settling into veins of soil. We may someday be gone, but dust will hold our signatures, carbon residue, metallic traces, radioactive pollen. Even after silence expands around us, those motes will drift, patient, impartial. Science reminds us dust alters climate too. Each eruption's ash veil cools the planet. Each desert storm darkens ice, hastening melt. Dust is an agent, silent, but transformative. It sculpts as much as it remembers, reshaping light and heat, hastening or slowing decay. Perhaps this is why dust feels prophetic. It foretells shifts not always visible to us. Cloudy skies turning red at sunset, seasons altered by particles too small to see. It carries not only memory from the past, but omens for the future. And yet dust is also deeply personal. It gathers on our windowsills, faint films that we erase without thought. But even this house dust is a blend of worlds, skin cells, spores, fibers, fragments of ancient soil carried on shoe soles. Each speck is a microcosm of history, drawn together indiscriminately. When we wipe it away, we forget. But the earth does not. It carries forward, particle by particle, until some layer far in the future thickens into compacted memory. Perhaps that is the secret role of dust, to remind us that memory is everywhere, whether visible or not. Even silence releases its sediment, eventually. Even forgetting is granular. The anatomy of civilizations, the collapse of mountains, the wither of forests, these are reduced in the end not to monuments or ruins, but to dust. And dust in scattering ensures they are all mingled together, never entirely gone. And yet, if dust holds such oracular power, carrying life across oceans, carrying memory into stone, seeding histories yet unborn, then what of landscapes shaped by its settling, the deserts and plains it builds grain by grain? Could entire futures already be written in these drifting sediments, waiting to assemble into worlds we have yet to imagine? Could entire futures already be written in these drifting sediments, waiting to assemble into worlds we have yet to imagine? For every grain of dust that falls, every layer of silt that gathers, reshapes the face of Earth in silences too slow to notice. Landscapes, those vast canvases we think of as permanent, are nothing more than accumulations of passing breaths. A mountain ridge, a desert valley, a fertile plain, they are the ever-changing sentences of a planet whose pulse never ceases, even when it slows. When Earth halts its spin, that pulse will continue, transforming surface into unfamiliar geographies. Deserts would widen, as winds, no longer tempered by rotation's arcs, carve dunes into continents. Dust storms would thicken, feeding plains thousands of kilometers away, sketching new horizons across what was once ocean floor. Rivers, heavier in their flow under stronger gravity, would carve gullies and deltas deeper, chiseling memory into the fresh exposures of land dredged from vanished seas. Glaciers, unbound from cycles of season, would crawl ceaselessly across the eternal night side, sculpting dark terrain into cathedrals of ice. Landscapes would be drawn not by gentle rhythm, but by extremes, frozen silence on one half, relentless erosion on the other, both converging along twilight's trembling belt. And yet, even here, the pattern endures the patient erosion, the subtle layering, the geologic handwriting that cares not for whether the earth turns. Plains fade into basins, cliffs collapse into talus slopes, sediments sink into oceans, building strata one whisper at a time. To us the process seems cruel, mountains lost, valleys filled, familiar landmarks erased. But to geology, it is simply continuation, the flow of landscapes away from sharp lines towards soft horizons. Perhaps this is what we mean when we speak of fading pulses, the sharp thrum of surfaces giving way to quiet undulations, stability found not in permanence but in dissolution. Fossils, too, would shift into landscapes of absence. Creatures buried in the twilight belt would intertwine with dust sediments, recording not just life but the conditions of stillness. Forests fossilized half in shadow, half in light, their tree rings caught mid-transition between scorching drought and freezing expansion. Fish trapped where seas retreated toward poles, forever immortalized in mudstone that no tide will return. Each landscape becomes both page and echo, a narrative not of life alone but of change itself written in grain and layer. The haunting truth is that landscapes are always vanishing in order to become. Deserts expand at the cost of once green plains. Ice sheets advance, sculpting valleys, before collapsing into meltwaters that redraw coastlines entirely. Even human memory is tied to this truth. Entire cultures rise around rivers that once flowed differently. Cities built on fertile soil fall when the land grows exhaustingly dry. Our myths, even those of floods, of exiles into deserts, of journeys to frozen lands, are only cultural mirrors of the landscapes that receded from us and reshaped our course. When the pulse fades, new myths will follow, written by survivors who walk among dunes where oceans once breathed, or who climb ridges of ice where once there was forest. There is a quiet humility in thinking of landscapes as time's vocabulary. Each one is temporary, yet crucial. Each dune, each cliff, each basin, is a letter in an ongoing sentence. Earth tells. Stillness at the surface will not erase this storytelling. It will amplify it, quickening some erosions, extending others into endless duration. Perhaps the halted earth is not without language but speaking even more insistently in ridges and plains. Could it be that these faded pulses are not endings, but verses we have not yet learned how to read? At a human scale, we know landscapes by their silence. Standing in vast deserts, you feel time itself stretched thin, dunes whispering of grains carried for centuries, each crest brittle under the wind. Standing before glaciers, you feel pressure, kilometers of ice compressing snowflake into crystal, fissure into blue corridors that echo like cathedrals of silence. These sensations are the pulse of a planet, not in the rapid beat of heart or tide, but in the faint pressure of persistence. A halted spin would not mute this presence, it would deepen it, extend it until silence itself feels as solid as stone. Dust, glaciers, rivers, these are the sculptors of the fading pulse, but there is also fire. Volcanoes do not wait for rotation, they breach wherever mantle rises, carving black scars across land newly exposed. In landscapes of fading rhythm, volcanic plains might become the new continents, their basalt flows the punctuation marks of Earth's silence. A black desert of cooled lava against endless sunlight, or a glowing fissure spilling fire into endless night, both are landscapes reminding us that fading is never truly loss, only transformation. Perhaps this is why poets through ages have called deserts eternal, glaciers timeless, volcanoes ageless. They are landscapes whose pulse is already slow enough to echo the rhythms beneath spin. They remind us that Earth's surface has always been choreographed by forces deeper than the skies. To imagine the landscapes of a still Earth is to recognize that they are not interruptions but continuations. And yet, if this is so, if landscapes themselves fade into quiet forms of memory, then how much of ourselves will remain in them? Will our ruins be integrated into dunes, softened into ridges, until indistinguishable from natural stone? Will our bones mix with river sediment to become anonymous fossils? If landscapes write the story of Earth's fading pulse, are we already being written back into it, not as beings, but as features, as formations, as anonymous curves of dust and stone? Are we already being written back into it, not as beings but as features, as formations, as anonymous curves of dust and stone? Perhaps nothing would hasten that blending more than a planet split between extremes, between one half burned by unbroken sun, and the other abandoned to perpetual frost. For in a halted Earth, warmth would no longer circle the globe, it would linger cruelly in place. The world would divide into two domains, heat without breath, cold without reprieve. On the side of eternal daylight, the sun scalds mercilessly, pinned at zenith or frozen just above horizon. Heat pools without rotation to disperse it, hardening soils, vaporizing waters, baking the very ground into mineral scars. Oceans retreat, evaporating into clouds that gather but never pass. They hover as endless, swollen ghosts, releasing downpours only to have the water snatched back again into steam, a frantic loop with no night to cool it, no darkness to ease its pulse. Rivers become mirages, never reaching seas that now shrink like veins in thirsting flesh. Here, landscapes crack, Salt basins sprawl like bleaching mirrors, mountains shimmer behind heat haze, their snow vanished forever, their slopes bare and scorched. Insect wings, feathers, even flesh itself struggle to endure where air becomes an oven, where breath feels heavier with each inhalation. Not because there is no air, but because heat itself chokes, swelling atmosphere, thinning the very difference between inhaling and surrendering. Heat without breath is more than drought, more than desert. It is suffocation by fire's patience. And yet, on the opposite side of the earth, another silence builds. The frozen continent of night, unbroken by any sunrise, grows colder, not only at the surface, but deep within its bones. Oceans congeal, ice thickening upon ice, kilometers of compression whispering of time's frozen weight. Air grows brittle, its moisture startled into snow that falls endlessly, building dunes of crystals sharpened against an eternal starlight. Here, glaciers amass not seasonally but relentlessly, advancing like armies never called back, sculpting whole basins into whitened cathedrals. Creatures, if they persisted, might crowd into margins, the twilight zones between. Here, perhaps, currents of air allow breath, warmth enough to permit rivers to trickle, yet coolness to prevent their vanishing. Could life invent strange bodies there, half desert, half frost, adapted to two contradictory eternities? Lichens already cling to rocks in polar cold, microbial mats already survive in boiling hot springs. Perhaps these outliers point the way that in unimaginable stillness, evolution would not cease but pivot, sculpting fragile organisms to endure where no human body could. Science reminds us that circulation of atmosphere of ocean would not entirely vanish. Warmth would creep from one side of the planet to the other, transported by currents driven by the stark imbalance itself. Great winds might forever roar from hot hemisphere to cold, carrying heat in desperate trade. Currents might turn subseas beneath the ice, stirring dark waters in endless hidden exchange. Yet this would not bring balance, only turbulence, only an atmosphere torn between contradictions. Existence at the edges would be possible, but never gentle. Philosophically, one wonders, would we even recognize such a split existence as Earth? Day has always promised night. Night has always promised day. Breath itself is tied to this exchange. The inhale and the exhale, neither meaningful alone. A world with only endless light, only endless dark is like a chest that inhales but never releases, or exhales but never draws again. It is respiration broken, presence without rhythm. Heat without breath feels less like survival than imprisonment. And yet, in this imprisonment, memory would still write itself. Minerals altered by roasting heat, rocks fractured by thermal expansion day after day forever, ice cores thicker than any we know, archiving the eternal night's snowfall across aeons. Soil compositions split cleanly on one side, baked, oxidized, rusted red, on the other sealed in glacial whiteness, isotopes locked away beneath ages of frozen air. Perhaps the most complete archive of Earth's stillness would be this brutal division, an atlas built from two states, light and shadow, bound together without overlap. For humans, though, survival here is not certain. Where would we go? If we crowded into twilight belts, would culture too divide between fiery day and frozen night? Would we speak of light as curse, of darkness as salvation? Would we grow to worship one while fearing the other, myths unfolding from climate's imprisonment? And if so, would identity fracture as well, humanity splitting not by language or geography, but by its chosen eternity, sunburnt or icebound? Perhaps, though, the truest difficulty is not in adapting bodies, but in adapting consciousness. To live in heat without breath is to live in permanence without refreshment, never a cool night to promise reprieve. To live in frozen night is to live in silence without return, never a sunrise to promise renewal. Life can endure hardship. What it struggles to endure is meaning drained by monotony. Perhaps the greatest cost of a halted earth is not the physics at all, but the erosion of narrative. And yet, if heat and breath are severed, if night and renewal disappear, is there not a deeper silence yet to come? One that is not even physical, but existential. The silence we feel when the world outside can no longer remind us that we are moving. If heat suffocates without breath, might silence itself one day press against us with equal weight? Might silence itself one day press against us with equal weight? We are taught to think of silence as absence, as the gentle pause between sounds, as the calm that follows a storm. Yet in a halted earth, where rotation ceases, and the rhythms we rely upon collapse, silence becomes denser than we can imagine. It gathers not only as an acoustic hush, but as a presence that fills every hollow of existence, clinging to body and stone alike. A silence heavy enough to alter perception, a silence that bends meaning. Silence is never total. Even now, in the quietest desert or deepest cave, there is always some measure of vibration, blood moving in veins, wind brushing sand grains, the faint hum of Earth's own intervals. But in a still planet, deprived of rotation's secret music, what remains becomes exaggerated. The absence of cyclical noise, the cycle of day breaking night, the cycle of tides rushing shore, leaves behind something more absolute. What was once background becomes foreground. The whisper of water dripping in a cave becomes deafening. The pulse of one's own heart in a frozen valley becomes overwhelming. Silence is no longer benign. It is weight, pressing awareness down to the smallest details. Science might describe this silence differently. Without winds racing in chaotic symmetry, vast swaths of land might grow still, with heat concentrated on one side and cold gripping the other. There are places where atmosphere falls into muted stasis, where nothing stirs but slow convection. These are the quiet zones, where even weather hesitates. Here, dust settles directly, roads vanish beneath accumulations not scattered by storm. Cities crumble without the familiar roar of air, until their collapse feels ceremonial, hushed like the closing of a heavy book. What began as catastrophe ripens into eerie calm, and in such calm silence reveals itself as more than empty air. It is gravity of the senses. How would we live in such a silence? Human beings, accustomed to rhythm and sound, might suffer disorientation. Already, studies in anechoic chambers show how unsettling true quiet can be. Separated from external cues, people hear the flow of their own blood, the creak of joints, the slide of breath. They describe the silence as oppressive, almost deafening, like a pressure descending. Now imagine this not for minutes, but for lifetimes. In a still earth, silence could become a tangible burden, each step echoed without respite, each whisper magnified until it carried the weight of entire rooms. Communities surviving in twilight might learn to speak less, using gesture in place of voice, their languages thinning like echoes into rare murmurs. Animals, too, would shape themselves to the silence. Songs that once carried across forests might vanish. Insects might abandon constant droning, their noise useless against the immovable backdrop. Predators could grow attuned to minute sounds, a single rustle in frozen air enough to betray prey. Evolution might sculpt new ears, new sensitivities, tuned to silences instead of sounds, creatures sharpened to hear absence itself. Entire ecologies might emerge where what matters is not the noise created, but the silence held. Philosophy wonders whether identity might erode here, for memory relies on interruption, on sound against silence, event against pause. If distinction blurs, if all that remains is a heavy quiet, would we still see ourselves as narrative beings? Or would self dissolve into background, thoughts drifting like dust, unanchored by rhythm or punctuation? Perhaps this is the greatest danger of silence with weight. It presses so firmly that it flattens difference, erasing the division between ourselves and our environment, until we too are only another layer of stillness. And yet silence is not always erasure. Sometimes silence is archive. Consider ice sheets, where silence of snowfall compacts into layers, each quieter than the last. Within that compacted quiet lies history written in trapped bubbles of gas, in isotopes preserved across millennia. Silence here does not destroy memory but preserves it, pressing it so firmly that it can be read long after storms are gone. Might the silence of a halted Earth serve the same? Might it fossilize our existence through compression, holding our species, our landscapes, under a weight that paradoxically secures their imprint? Silence not as absence but as mineral. Even sound itself, fleeting though it is, becomes sediment in some sense. Vibrations reshape stones, collapse towers, alter landscapes through resonance. In a halted Earth, stripped of its wider orchestra, each sound surviving would carve more sharply against the backdrop. Perhaps the crack of ice would register more profoundly, remembered longer, because it broke oppressive quiet. Perhaps we would learn to see silence as the canvas, each sound like a fossilized mark left upon it. A bird's single cry in an eternal evening might echo far longer in memory than centuries of songs once did. Culture, if it survived, might even elevate silence from burden into divinity. Entire philosophies could emerge that treat stillness as sacred, treating absence as fullness. Music might evolve beyond constant melody, into occasional tones dropped into immense pauses, hymns stretched across weeks instead of minutes. Poetry could thrive not in the printed word, but in the spaces between lines, language transfigured into intervals rather than declarations. When silence holds weight, everything expressed against it gleams brighter. But the question lingers, what happens as silence grows too heavy? When absence is not canvas but wall, would consciousness buckle under the pressure, dissolving into trance-like states, half dream and half vacancy? Could our descendants become more like stones themselves, silent, enduring, barely perceiving? If the earth ceases to spin, perhaps one of its greatest inheritances is not destruction but transformation into a planet where silence, not motion, writes identity. And yet, if silence itself could weigh upon us so deeply, pressing identity thin, what of the wider cosmos still moving around us? Would the memories of orbiting planets, the still turning stars, echo louder against our paused earth? If silence here is so oppressive, then might the motion of the cosmos become its own reminder that somewhere beyond, memory still runs, even when ours begins to fade? Might the motion of the cosmos become its own reminder that somewhere beyond, memory still runs, even when ours begins to fade? For though the earth may halt, the heavens continue. The sun blazes in its fusion, restless for billions of years more. The planets keep their coursing paths, great ellipses, drawn in gravity's ink. Even far beyond, comets wander back through the system, meteors graze the skies, galaxies wheel their spirals in silence, indifferent to our stillness. The memory of motion is written into the design of the cosmos itself, and even if Earth falls quiet, it cannot cancel the clockwork surrounding it. Orbit is memory incarnate. Planets remember their birth, not in story, but in trajectory, set loose from chaos. They settled into patterns, and have held them like vows ever since. Each orbit is a kind of loyalty, a return engraved in gravity. Even the moon, drifting slowly from us, displays this strange fidelity. Each revolution, each tidal tug, is proof not of independence, but of relationship. These paths are moments not erased, but endlessly repeated. Time folded into circles. Without spin, Earth might feel disobedient, an outlier, but the cosmos would continue its geometry, a reminder of rhythms larger than any single world. What would it mean to live on a planet that no longer moves as all others do? Looking out at night, if one lived on the dark half, stars would remain fixed, as if nailed into the sky. Constellations would never revolve. The sense of being beneath a dome in motion would vanish. Yet if one watched carefully, one would still notice the moon shifting across its orbit, still see planets wandering slightly against the static stars. In this difference is a paradox. Earth silent, cosmos still breathing. Perhaps the most haunting truth, the rest of the universe would move on without us. Science makes clear, Earth's orbit around the sun remains even without spin. The years would pass as measured by seasons, hot for one hemisphere, cold for the other, though now stretched into contrasts unbearable. Yet orbits themselves carry continuity. Isotopes in ice cores record annual layering. Sediment flux responds to orbital variations known as Milankovitch cycles. Even deeper, isotope ratios in ancient shells reveal that the Earth has long carried the memory of orbiting rhythms, storing them in calcium carbonate, in oxygen ratios whispered by frozen seas. Motion does not vanish simply because we stop watching. Orbit keeps time with or without our gaze. This raises a deeper meditation. Perhaps motion itself is cosmic memory. Every trajectory is an echo of what has come before, every acceleration a consequence of an earlier force. The Earth moves around the sun because of gravity, but that gravity is memory, the line between what was and what will be, binding even across emptiness. Perhaps in a halted Earth we would learn this more clearly, seeing that memory does not depend on spin alone. It is in every orbital return, every circle that refuses to forget its center. Philosophy leans closer here, asking if motion is memory, is forgetting possible at all? Does the cosmos ever truly forget, or does it hold all things in gravitational embrace, their paths forever responding to the echoes of ancient momentum? When a comet falls sunward, it is not new, it is the long return from its last farewell. When a planet circles, it does not move forward into novelty, it revisits, endlessly. Perhaps the universe itself has no forgetting, only recurrence. If so, then we who fade into dust are still remembered by orbit, not as individuals but as fragments continuing endlessly, particles pulled into new paths which repeat with equal fidelity. And yet, tension hums beneath this beauty. What meaning holds for us in orbits if memory is endless, but identity is erased? If the cosmos recalls only through movement, then perhaps what continues is not our story, but only our mass, our energy, our gravitation folded invisibly into cycles. Maybe this is enough. To be remembered not for our names but for our weight, for the pull we once gave to a trajectory, subtle but permanent. Still, the halted planet would sit as anomaly, like a broken gear in a flawless watch. It would be a reminder that memory is not universal after all, that some rhythms can indeed be lost, some motions stilled. The Earth would orbit still, yes, but without its spin, it would resemble less the companion of planets we know, and more a ghost, a relic of motion denied. For in the cosmic dance, one stationary partner disturbs the symmetry, and yet the dance continues. Planets moving in arcs around their stars, stars circling galactic centers, galaxies themselves stretching outward into space, motion carrying onward memory without us. And so, we are left with a haunting image, a still Earth suspended in a sea of orbits, its people living beneath fixed skies, while above them all else remembers. The moon still shifts, planets still wander, the sun still glows, the cosmos continues turning, even if we do not. And yet, if orbit itself is unbroken memory, if the cosmos remembers even when Earth forgets, then what shape does forgetting truly take? Perhaps forgetting is not the loss of memory, but its reshaping, like orbits that stretch from circles into ellipses, from closeness to distance. If so, then what becomes of forgetting here, on the still Earth? What form might it carve into us, into history, into geology itself? What becomes of forgetting here, on the still Earth? What form might it carve into us, into history, into geology itself? For if orbit is a kind of eternal memory, gravity's longing endlessly replayed, then forgetting must belong to the surface, the frail skin of the planet, the crust where rivers erase their beds, where dunes reshape valleys, where civilizations rise only to be unwoven back into dust. Forgetting is the planet's quiet talent, its endless editing of what once was. We tend to think of forgetting as defect, as loss. Yet forgetting is not only erasure, it has a shape all its own. Erosion itself is forgetting in motion, pulling sharp ridges into soft lines, carrying artifacts into delta silt. Forests forget their individual leaves so they might endure as collective canopy. Oceans forget their waves so they may persist as depth. In truth, forgetting is how memory is made, livable, lightened of too much detail. Without forgetting, we would drown in the vastness of recall. Earth shows this to us gently. Memory and forgetting are not opposites but companions. Still, in a stopped planet, the shape of forgetting changes. With no sunrise, there is no daily punctuation. With no seasons, there is no steady turning back to remind us of cycles. Forgetting here would be less an erasure of details, and more a dissolving of structure, as though the very concept of sequence had gone slack. Whole generations might live and die under frozen skies, their moments blurring into one another, histories compressing until indistinguishable. Civilizations might endure, but without rhythm to anchor them. Their stories may fold inward, circular, nearer to myth than chronology. Forgetting would take the shape of drift, not sharp absence but slow blending. Geology too would record this differently. Sagging skyscrapers absorbed into sediment would not be noted as ruins from some date, but as blended inclusions, concrete sifted with silt, steel tangled with clay, memory unattributed to singular time. Ice cores on the night side would capture centuries stacked atop centuries, with no mark of year or season to divide them. Strata become less like layered script, more like watercolor, edges blurred until the whole is impression rather than record. Earth would recall but vaguely, erratically. The shape of forgetting here is diffusion, a soft wash over once sharp lines. Perhaps this is not so alien. Already, most of the planet's story is lost to us. We know more about the last few 100 million years than the vast billions before them. Life's records are scattered, biased, partial, whole landscapes, whole biomes, evaded fossilization, washed away before impression could take hold. What we know comes as fragments rebuilt like broken pottery, shards assembled into conjecture. If Earth forgets us one day, it will not be cruelty, only repetition of its nature, and perhaps, like paleontologists of today, distant beings will decipher fragments of our existence, never sure of the whole but sensing its outline, just enough to know we had been. And still, the notion unsettles, because forgetting touches identity. When we forget a story, we feel it vanish from us. as if we ourselves diminish. But what if this is the natural way of things? What if identity itself is sculpted by what it loses? Just as a fossil is a memory of form, not of motion or warmth, maybe our identities also fossilize only partially. Forgetting prunes, pares down, reduces us to essentials. Perhaps this is what the planet mirrors. The shape of forgetting is the shape of distillation. In such a world without spin, where time no longer marks itself, forgetting might also grow liberating. Freed of clock and season, memory loosens. What if we ceased to measure ourselves by calendar or hour? Would we forget failures sooner, loosening our griefs? Would triumphs scatter too, unanchored from exact days? Could humanity in its exile learn a gentler kind of presence, not defined by sequence, but by immersion in the ongoing moment? Forgetting, then, is not absence but unburdening, a release from chronologies that cage us. And yet, forgetting also whispers of danger. For what if too much is lost? Without some thread to follow, how do we remember who we are? If civilizations blur into sediments, if stories are smoothed by silence, if generations fold without distinction, do we still exist as narrative beings? Or do we become more like landscapes, features with no sharp boundary, persistent but impersonal? Perhaps the ultimate shape of forgetting is transformation, not disappearance, but transition from self to world, from person to dust, from culture to geology. In the end, perhaps Earth shows us this. Forgetting always has texture. It is never total absence, but erosion, blending, diffusion, transformation. It is the bone without flesh, the desert where an ocean once lay, the faint carbon signature of a vanished civilization. To forget is not to lose, but to reframe. The shape of forgetting is the ripple mark fossilized in sandstone, no longer a wave but the shadow of one. And yet, if forgetting is always partial, if some residue always lingers, then perhaps stillness is not the end of memory either. Perhaps even a frozen planet, stripped of rotation's rhythm, will carry echoes still, waiting for something, someone to notice. And if forgetting itself can take shape, then what might be the final shape? The closing form of this halted Earth, when motion begins again. Could forgetting itself be only interlude, a preparation before some final slow renewal?